When we think about how global empires are built, I mean, our minds usually jump straight to the obvious stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like invading armies, tanks rolling down the street.
Yeah, exactly. Flags being aggressively planted in the ground, lines being redrawn on a map.
It's a very visceral image. And historically, that is the primary way we've been taught to understand geopolitical dominance. You conquer a territory, you occupy it, and you extract its wealth.
Right. But what if the most powerful empire in modern history wasn't built with tanks at all?
That is the big question.
What if instead it was built in quiet, air-conditioned boardrooms? You know, using spreadsheets, highly optimistic economic forecasts, and massive, just deliberately crushing debt.
Well, you're talking about an invisible architecture of control, and I'd argue that kind of system is incredibly effective precisely because it doesn't look like an invasion.
No, not at all.
To the untrained eye, it looks like foreign aid. It looks like financial assistance and modernization.
Totally. And if you are the kind of learner who loves connecting those hidden dots, someone who wants those massive aha moments without drowning in dense financial jargon, well, you have found the perfect deep dive today.
We have some truly fascinating material to get through.
We really do. We are pulling apart the claims made in a highly controversial but really gripping book by John Perkins called Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
And we're going to look at how massive international power grids in the 1970s actually connect to the price of oil.
Yeah, and eventually to the geopolitical instability we see all over the news today.
So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack the mechanics of global debt. We are going to dissect a concept the source material calls the corporatocracy, and we'll look at how these massive infrastructure loans are allegedly weaponized as instruments of global control.
Now, before we jump into the actual mechanics of this, I do need to offer a really important disclaimer for you.
Right, this is crucial to keep in mind.
The source material we are exploring today contains some highly explosive claims. Claims regarding U.S. foreign policy, international intelligence agencies, and global finance. Our goal here today is absolutely not to endorse or validate or take a political side on these viewpoints.
Exactly. Our job is just to impartially break down the arguments.
Yep, just exploring the narrative presented in the source. We want to lay the logic out clearly so you can analyze these ideas and decide for yourself.
We're essentially reverse engineering a system. We're looking at the blueprint provided by someone who claims to have been a key architect in all of this.
And what a blueprint it is. But, I mean, to understand the global impact, I think we have to start with the psychology of it.
Oh, for sure. The human element.
Like, how does an individual actually get recruited into this shadow economy? It's not like you just browse a job board and apply for global economic saboteur.
No, definitely not. And the recruitment process is actually one of the most revealing parts of the book. According to Perkins, his entry didn't start with, like, a banking application. It started with testing by the NSA.
The National Security Agency.
Yeah, the NSA. And the psychological profile they were looking for is crucial here. They weren't just hunting for mathematical geniuses.
Right.
They were actively looking for specific, exploitable character flaws.
The transcript we're analyzing uses a very specific word for his profile, seducible.
Seducible, yes. The tests identified that Perkins had this deep-seated anger, a relentless drive to become wealthy, and a distinct willingness to bend the truth.
Or just outright lie if it served his personal ambitions.
Exactly. He was smart, but more importantly, his moral compass was flexible.
Which makes him the perfect asset.
Yeah.
But he doesn't go to work for the government, right?
No, he gets hired by a private engineering consulting firm called Maine, Charles T. Maine, Inc.
And that creates a layer of deniability.
Complete deniability. And he's trained by this mysterious woman named Claudine.
Claudine. She bluntly tells him his actual job title is Economic Hitman, or EHM.
Yeah, and she gives him a very cinematic warning. She says, once you're in for life.
I mean, it sounds like a spy thriller. But Claudine's training is rooted in very real geopolitical shit.
Oh, absolutely. The source traces the entire EHM model back to 1951 in Iran, specifically the overthrow of the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because understanding 1951 Iran is really the key to understanding everything else. Why was that specific event the turning point?
Well, Mossadegh had nationalized Iran's oil, which seriously threatened British American corporate interests.
Right. The oil was suddenly off limits to them.
Exactly. But rather than sending in a traditional army to take the oil back, which would have been messy, wildly expensive, and risked sparking a broader conflict with the Soviet Union, the US and UK used intelligence agencies to orchestrate a coup.
So they changed tactics.
Yeah. They realized that covert manipulation, leveraging economic pressure and political sabotage was infinitely more efficient than traditional warfare. That realization became the bedrock of the EHM playbook.
So the strategy evolves from there. The core mechanism they develop is actually surprisingly simple when you strip away all the macroeconomic jargon.
It really is.
The EHM's goal is to approach a developing nation and convince its leaders to take out a staggering loan from an institution like the World Bank or the IMF.
Right, and the pitch is always about modernization. They say, let us fund your new massive power plants, your national highways, your deep-water industrial ports.
But the money doesn't go to the country.
No, it doesn't. That is the critical sleight of hand in all this.
Right. The loan has a strict string attached. Every single lucrative construction and engineering contract must be awarded to U.S. corporations.
So the money just changes hands in Washington.
Exactly. The money is transferred from banks in Washington directly to engineering firms in the U.S. I was thinking about how to visualize this, and it's essentially like handing someone a credit card with an astronomical limit.
Okay, yeah.
But you're forcing them to spend it exclusively at your store.
Right, they can't shop anywhere else.
Yeah. Exactly. The money never really leaves your ecosystem. And then, when that person inevitably goes bankrupt because the interest is crushing them, you repossess their actual house and land.
That analogy hits the nail on the head, honestly, because the bankruptcy isn't an accident. The debt is the weapon itself.
Wow.
The projects are deliberately overscaled so the country will inevitably default. And when they do, the economic hitman returns to demand a pound of flesh.
And they aren't asking for money because they know the treasury is empty at that point.
Yeah.
They ask for sovereignty.
They demand geopolitical favors. The EHM might say, well, since you can't pay your debt, you need to vote alongside the U.S. in the next UN resolution.
Or we need permission to build a strategic military base on your border.
Exactly. Or you need to grant our oil companies unfettered, untaxed access to your rainforests. The country is completely absorbed into an empire run by what the book calls the corporatocracy.
So let's define that term for the listener because it comes up constantly in the source. The corporatocracy isn't just some vague idea of big business, is it?
No, it's a literal revolving door. It's a tightly knit alliance between government agencies, major banks, and massive multinational corporations.
Okay, so how does that work in practice?
Well, imagine a CEO of a massive construction firm leaving his job to become the Secretary of Defense, and then leaving the Pentagon a few years later to sit on the advisory board of the World Bank.
Ah, I see.
The people at the top of these three pillars share the exact same financial incentives and worldview.
Now, as a listener, you might be wondering, if this is such an obvious trap, why on earth would the leader of a developing nation ever sign that loan agreement? Like, are they just naive?
Far from it. The system relies heavily on local elite corruption.
Right, they get bought off.
The EHM ensures that the small group of wealthy individuals running the developing country get a massive cut. They get kickbacks, they get their family businesses integrated into the construction process, and they get the political glory of cutting ribbons in front of shiny new power plants.
So the local leaders get incredibly rich today, while the crushing debt burden is pushed onto the working class of tomorrow.
Precisely.
Okay, so this debt trap works devastatingly well for developing nations. But it raises a huge logistical problem.
Right, the adaptation phase.
Yeah. How does a system entirely built on debt adapt when it suddenly encounters a country that has way too much cash? You can't really trap someone in a loan if they're swimming in money.
And this is where the 1970s becomes a fascinating era of adaptation for them. The corporatocracy proves it isn't just a rigid one-trick pony. To understand how they pivot, the source material contrasts two major case studies, Indonesia and Saudi Arabia.
Let's look at Indonesia first, because that was Perkins' classic assignment, right?
Yes, his proving ground.
He was sent to Java to create economic forecasts to justify these massive electrification loans. And his job was to literally cook the books.
He had to invent wildly optimistic projections showing that a new power plant would somehow boost the local economy by just an impossible percentage.
He was engineering the justification for the trap. And the book highlights a deeply telling moment involving another analyst at the firm, a guy named Howard Parker.
Oh, Parker's story is so tragic. He was an old-school, honest statistician. He ran the actual numbers and provided a realistic forecast, showing that the power plants would never generate enough growth to pay off the massive debt.
He told the truth.
Yeah.
And the reward for his honesty was getting fired immediately.
Yeah.
Because the World Bank in Maine didn't want the
Right.
truth. They wanted the justification to move the money.
Exactly. And Perkins, on the other hand, provided the fake numbers and was rewarded with promotions and wealth.
But the source notes this triggered a massive moral crisis for him. I mean, he was living in absolute five-star luxury in Jakarta while completely surrounded by staggering poverty that his own spreadsheets were helping to cement.
That is the baseline model for poor countries. But then we hit the 1973 to 1974 oil crisis. The price of oil skyrockets, and suddenly Saudi Arabia is absolutely flooded with petrodollars.
They don't need World Bank loans at all.
Not even a little bit. They have more capital than they know what to do with.
What's fascinating here is how the corporatocracy pivots. The goal in Saudi Arabia wasn't debt creation. It was wealth recycling.
Right, because the U.S. economy was struggling at the time.
Yeah, and they realized they needed to pull all of those billions of petrodollars back into the American financial system somehow.
So Washington approaches the Saudi royal family with an unprecedented deal. The U.S. offers the House of Saud complete military protection, essentially guaranteeing their political survival.
Which is huge.
And they offer every technological resource needed to build a modern nation out of the desert. In exchange, Saudi Arabia has to guarantee two things.
Okay, what are they?
First, they must maintain stable oil prices for the global market. Second, and crucially, they must promise to invest a massive portion of their oil profits directly into U.S. Treasury securities.
Okay, let's pause and look at the sheer genius of this mechanism because the macroeconomic ripple effects are just staggering. First, the source explicitly calls this the Saudi Arabian money laundering affair.
A very loaded term.
It is. The U.S. Treasury takes the interest generated by those Saudi investments and uses that exact money to hire U.S. engineering firms to build Saudi Arabia's new infrastructure. You know, the highways, the desalination plants, entire modern cities.
U.S. companies are getting paid with the interest generated by Saudi money to build infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. It is a perfectly closed-loop system.
But I'd argue it's even deeper than that. By forcing Saudi Arabia, and eventually the rest of OPEC, to price all their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, it means every country on Earth suddenly needs to hold U.S. dollars just to buy the energy they need to survive.
It artificially props up the value of the American dollar.
Exactly, and cements it as the global reserve currency.
It is brilliant, and it is ruthless. It shows that whether a country is destitute or drowning in cash, the corporatocracy can design a funnel that ensures global wealth continuously flows back to its own centralized power structure.
I mean, it seems foolproof. Trap the poor, recycle the wealth of the rich, but systems this tight eventually encounter a glitch.
They always do.
What happens when a nationalist leader sees the spreadsheet for what it is and simply refuses to sign the contract?
Well, when the velvet glove of economic manipulation fails, the iron fist comes out. The source claims the playbook dictates a very brutal escalation. The late 1970s provide three distinct examples of this resistance: Panama, Iran, and Colombia.
Let's start with Panama. You have Omar Torrijos, a wildly popular, charismatic nationalist leader. He wanted a new canal built, but he explicitly wanted it funded by Japan, not the U.S.
Right, a direct challenge.
And more importantly, he demanded that any foreign aid actually be used to uplift the poor in Panama, rather than just lining the pockets of a corrupt elite.
Torrijos fundamentally broke the EHM model. As we discussed earlier, the system only works if the leader is corruptible. If the leader won't take the bribe and refuses to pass the debt to his citizens, the entire mechanism stalls.
Yeah, there's a great detail in the book about that. The famous novelist Graham Greene actually met with Torrijos.
Oh, right, the warning.
Yes. He warned him that by rejecting the debt trap, he was actively provoking the giant of the North and putting his own life in grave danger.
And then there's Iran. Instead of a defiant leader like Torrijos, you had a completely compliant one, the Shah, whom the U.S. had helped install back in the 50s. The Shah signed everything the EHMs put in front of him.
They launched massive modernization projects, right?
Yeah, including one called Desert in Bloom. On paper, in Washington, it looked like a total triumph. U.S. corporations were making an absolute fortune.
But the societal reality on the ground was a complete disaster. These projects ignored the cultural, religious, and environmental realities of the Iranian people. It displaced farmers and generated massive public fury.
The source mentions Perkins interacting with a torture victim known as Doc and an anti-Shah rebel named Yamin.
Wow.
These interactions proved a fatal flaw in the corporatocracy's logic. You can buy a puppet leader, you can control the military, but if you push a population into enough poverty and anger, the facade eventually shatters.
Which it did, spectacularly and violently, in the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
Exactly. And then we have Colombia, which was experiencing the classic debt trap model with these massive dam projects. This sparked fierce, armed guerrilla resistance. And there is a chilling quote from Perkins's office at Maine regarding the unrest. He said someone literally told him, Colombians are expendable.
I mean, that single sentence encapsulates the total disregard for human life within this framework. Human beings are just obstacles to the engineering contract.
It's so cold.
But it's the systemic escalation that the book focuses on here. The claim is that when an economic hitman fails to coerce a leader, like Torrijos in Panama, or Ecuador's President Jaime Roldos, who is pushing to heavily tax foreign oil companies, the next step is to deploy the jackals.
Meaning CIA operatives, assassins.
Yes, according to the narrative, if the spreadsheet fails, the bullet is next. The source points heavily to the year 1981, when both Omar Torrijos and Jaime Roldos were killed in highly suspicious separate plane crashes just months apart.
And to add another layer of intrigue, both of those leaders had recently expelled a group called the SIL, the Summer Institute of Linguistics. Oh yeah, the missionaries.
Right. They presented themselves as an innocent missionary group, but the source claims they were widely accused of acting as a front for U.S. intelligence and oil interests, covertly mapping out indigenous lands for future resource extraction.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because as I'm looking at these claims about plane crashes and jackals, I do have to push back a little.
Let's hear it.
Does the book frame all of this as a literal smoke-filled room conspiracy? Like, are there 12 guys in suits sitting around a mahogany table explicitly ordering the assassination of a foreign president? Or is it describing a brutal, systemic gospel of profit that just operates on autopilot?
It's a really vital distinction to make. Perkins largely describes a pervasive, almost religious ideology. It's the unquestioned assumption baked into every business school and corporate boardroom that all economic growth is inherently good and that corporate expansion automatically equates to human progress.
Right, so it's systemic.
Yeah, you don't need a smoke-filled room coordinating a conspiracy if everyone at the top shares the exact same ruthless incentives. The system protects itself automatically.
But wait, a systemic incentive is one thing. Sabotaging an airplane is an overt tactical act of murder. If the corporatocracy operates on an unspoken alignment of interests, who is actually making the phone call to the jackals?
The book suggests the lines between corporate security, private intelligence, and state intelligence are completely blurred. The corporatocracy doesn't need to hold a formal vote. A threat to massive oil profits is perceived as a threat to national security, and the intelligence apparatus acts accordingly, often with complete autonomy.
Wow.
Perkins views the 1981 crashes not as tragic accidents, but as deliberate systemic maintenance.
But eventually, a system that ruthless generates a breaking point. And that brings us to the 21st century and the events that finally forced John Perkins to break his silence. He had been bribed with lucrative consulting jobs, he had been threatened, and for decades he kept quiet about his past as an EHM.
Until September 11, 2001.
According to the source, 9/11 was the ultimate catalyst for his confession. On the day the towers fell, Perkins happened to be deep in the Amazon rainforest with the indigenous Shuar tribe.
He was completely off the grid.
Entirely cut off from the modern world, entirely disconnected from the empire he helped build.
And it wasn't until he returned to the U.S., visited Ground Zero in New York, and had this really profound conversation with an Afghan refugee that the full weight of his life's work crystallized for him. He saw the devastating global blowback of the corporatocracy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the book's core argument is that extreme economic exploitation, resource theft, and the resulting grinding poverty do not happen in a vacuum.
No, of course not.
They breed severe desperation. They breed a profound, multi-generational anger toward the empire pulling the strings. And ultimately, that fertile ground of desperation is what breeds terrorism.
The source frames 9/11 not as an isolated random act of pure evil, but as a direct, horrifying reaction to decades of this invisible economic imperialism. But the tragedy is that the corporatocracy didn't respond to 9/11 by auditing its economic tactics.
Right, the gable down.
It responded by introducing the final, most extreme option in its playbook.
When the economic hitmen fail to trap a country in debt and the jackals fail to overthrow the government covertly, which the source claims happened with leaders like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the empire resorts to overt military intervention.
The book makes a very pointed assertion about the 2003 Iraq War. It argues that the invasion was largely detached from the public narrative of weapons of mass destruction.
Right, it was about something else entirely.
Exactly. Instead, it was fundamentally about securing control over massive Middle Eastern oil reserves and generating astronomical reconstruction contracts.
We see a brutal repetition of the Saudi Arabia model here, but enforced through military occupation. U.S. taxpayers fund $1 trillion war, the foreign country's infrastructure is obliterated by U.S. bombs, and then massive U.S. corporations like Bechtel and Halliburton are awarded billions in no-bid contracts to rebuild it.
It's just wild to think about.
The wealth is violently extracted from the taxpayer, laundered through a war zone, and flows right back into the corporatocracy.
It is an incredibly dark, cynical view of global affairs.
It really is. But the analytical takeaway from the book is that this kind of economic imperialism is inherently self-destructive. It might generate staggering, immediate profits for a select few at the top, but it sows seeds of global instability and hatred that eventually breach the walls of the empire itself. You cannot destabilize the entire globe and expect your own citizens to remain safe forever.
Which brings us right back to our own front doors. We've charted the rise of this alleged global empire, from the debt traps of the 60s to the overt wars of the 2000s. But the book doesn't just offer a geopolitical critique. It demands a deeply personal, philosophical shift.
Yeah, taking it from the macro to the micro.
How does a massive theory about global infrastructure loans actually apply to your everyday life?
The source makes a striking observation about the internal state of the United States. It notes that the U.S., despite being arguably the wealthiest and most powerful empire in human history, is suffering from what it calls a deadly social cancer.
Exactly. Underneath the shiny surface of economic dominance, the domestic reality is grim. There are dangerously high rates of suicide, rampant drug abuse, extreme wealth inequality, and violent crime. The system isn't just crushing developing nations, it is fundamentally failing its own people.
Which brings us back to Perkins's time in the Amazon. It's no coincidence that a man drowning in global corruption found clarity among an indigenous tribe. The source shares a piece of wisdom from the Shore tribe that deeply impacted him. They told him, "The world is as you dream it."
I really love that concept. We, as a modern society, dreamt of a world defined by factories, skyscrapers, relentless consumption, and endless economic growth. We agreed to that dream. And according to the books, that dream had metastasized into a nightmare.
The earth is being stripped, and the people living in the wealthiest nation on earth are miserable.
We desperately need to dream a different reality, one based on sustainability and equality.
The source also references an ancient indigenous prophecy, the condor and the eagle. It's a beautiful metaphor for global balance. The eagle represents the mind, logic, industry, and the material power of the global north. The condor represents the heart, spirituality, intuition, and our emotional connection to the earth and to each other.
So the eagle is basically running the show.
For centuries, the eagle has dominated. The prophecy is a call to bring the condor back into balance with the eagle.
So the ultimate message of the book isn't just pointing fingers at shadowy intelligence agencies or corrupt CEOs. It is a call for personal confession and self-reflection from the reader. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive isn't just a heavy history lesson. It's an invitation to audit your own life. Where have you silently accepted a system or a way of doing things that you intuitively know is flawed or harmful?
Because if the global economy, with all its debt traps, environmental destruction, and corporate dominance, is ultimately just a dream that we collectively agreed upon, it begs a crucial question.
Yeah, what is that question?
Think about that credit card analogy from earlier, where the money never leaves the company's store. What specific, everyday financial choices do you make that keep this current dream alive? Do you know what massive global projects your bank is funding with your deposits? Do you know the supply chain of the cheap goods you buy without thinking?
We vote for the corporatocracy every time we open our wallets. And I think the final, most provocative thought to leave you with is this. If this entire invisible empire is built on our silent compliance and our everyday purchases, what would happen tomorrow if you simply chose to dream differently?